Dawny, could you just close those doors, sweetheart, at the back, please, just so we can give Sarah a chance at being heard. Thank you. All right, that's great. All right, everybody, I'd like to welcome Sarah Goodley. I've already mentioned Sarah previously. She is spearheading our Ammach Checks, our Child Experiencer Workshop project, which is really exciting. She has already sent me some kind of small outline of an idea, and to be absolutely honest, I've had so much on my plate I haven't really given it attention. But anyway, I'd like to welcome Sarah, who's going to talk for about 20 minutes, half an hour.
Okay, the presentation this afternoon is on the... Thank you. Guy, a bit taller. Thank you. It's on the importance of supporting childhood experiences. First of all, what I'd like to do is explain, seeing as I'm not an experiencer myself, or to my knowledge I'm not an experiencer myself, I'd like to explain to a bit about why I'm interested and the situations that have happened in my experience that have overlapped slightly and brought me into what's happening with people who are experiencing this phenomena. So this is my matrilineal line, and what's happened in my matrilineal line. I was actually brought up by my grandmother, and not too unusual, you'd think. It happened quite a lot in the 60s and what have you. My mother was Jean, and she became pregnant when she was 17, and I was adopted by my grandmother. What was unusual, what we found out more recently, is that this phenomena has happened for the past 5 generations that we know of. So when you're looking at the transgenerational stuff and family patterns, I think that's something to look into. That this has gone on for as many as 5 generations and beyond, maybe, but definitely 5 that we know of. The other thing that Kate and I have always said is that we are here, this sort of incarnation, if you like, is to break the cycles. And I thoroughly think that that is what we're here to do. And it's interesting that both my daughters and my eldest daughter spent a lot of time being brought up by my mother, my real mother, and she actually went to live with her when she was 13. So it's gone on even on this generation. But since then, both my daughter Emma and my daughter Hannah have given birth to daughters who have both been stillborn. So I think we do think that this is probably a way of going, actually, enough's enough on this. That's it, we're going to break the cycle. So that's what's happening. And I think breaking the cycle of what's going on and raising awareness of what's going on, because whenever you can go, enough's enough, this is what's happening, and it can be honest and a truthful discussion, then things can change. And until that's what needs to happen. On the other side, this was my real father. Now, quite an unusual story here. If the picture's on your right, was when he was younger. The one on the extreme right was when he was probably fathering me. So he was quite an unusual character. He was actually born in Nottingham during the war, and when he was 3, he was adopted out to Mablethorpe. He had diphtheria, was slightly deaf, but seemed to have quite a sort of extra human abilities, really. And I've got press cuttings. He was on the lifeboat and he was a lifeguard in Mablethorpe during the 60s and 70s. And I've got press cuttings of the sort of heroic things that he did. And he saved a couple of children, one of which he revived. He fell in the sort of run, he ran off, he just sort of revived him at a time when he didn't really get people back. And he seemed to be able to have quite unusual abilities. And it's interesting that he ended up in the mental health system from the age of 30 to the age of 64 when he died. And every year, some of the family from the East Midlands used to send a Christmas card because he'd saved their son. So and that carried on till he died. I didn't really have a lot to do with him. I was always kept from him because he was a bit of a dangerous character. Although, again, he was a sort of he used to swim out. He used to go into the North Sea and swim out to the 2 Mile Buoy, spend 10 minutes having a rest, and then swim back. Now, anyone that's been in our North Sea knows that you have to be pretty unusual characters to do something because a stunt like that you do on a regular basis. And on the picture on the right is actually of my father and Kate's father together. So the left. Yeah, I'm not very good. I'm dyslexic. I'm not very good with my left and my right, so you'll have to bear with me. That was a picture in 2008, shortly before he died. Now, he became a paranoid schizophrenic, and at the age of 30, he was incarcerated after attacking somebody in Grimsby, and he remained incarcerated for 34 years. And anybody that's looked at the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest will have some idea of what he went through. What I notice now is I sort of got to know him later on in my life, and it was quite a joke. I'd already lost 2 dads, if you like. I'd lost my granddad dad in 2002, and before that we'd lost Kate's dad, who was sort of my stepdad, in 2001. So when the social worker phoned up shortly after this and said, we need you to get in touch, and your dad is sort of the end of his life and kept coming to the end of his life, etc. I made the joke that it was a good job I worked for myself, because if I was having to have time off to visit my 3rd dad's funeral, then they'd think I was a bit of a lying cow. But so what's interesting though, it was quite late when he ended up in the mental health system. Now, some say that it was when somebody put an LSD tablet in his drink. And it was a bit of a joke, and he never really recovered from this and seemed to change quite drastically after that. I wonder, with the knowledge that I've got now, whether he had some sort of walk-in on that experience. And the more I'm looking into the 4th dimensional stuff and the esoteric stuff then, and the more I know about other people's experiences when they've had eruptions. But I don't think, from what I can understand, that medicating him and electric shock treating him did him any favours. And when you look in other cultures, how people with experiences are treated. We've got a friend who lives in Turkey, and he says that if anybody starts developing any experiences, they're helped and supported through it. They're not drugged, they're not electric shocked. And of course, if you look from a shamanistic perspective, anybody experiencing unusual experiences are considered to be gifted, and they're helped through the demonic stage to get to a stage where the information that they've got for the tribe is useful to the tribe. Now, it's quite interesting that Maria, who was on last, was saying, what if she'd been listened to, what information would she have had? What information could she have brought to us? And so I think listening to the children and listening to people with unusual experiences, even dementia, I've been looking into dementia quite a lot, and even people suffering from dementia have information for us. So I think the more we listen to people who, whether they seem to be crazy or whether they're having some sort of experience and they're receiving some sort of information, and so we need to be listening. So how I've come into this is a bit through the natural health, a bit through education, a bit through the mental health with the counselling. But what I'm noticing is that children everywhere need support. All our children need support, including those with anomalous experiences. So what is important to children, all children, is to be born and have some sort of secure base. Now, if the original secure base is the mother's bond, the mother's love, the eye contact between the eyes and the breast, that is what the original secure base. It's food, it's love, it's nurture and warmth. And later on, When they've got that and they're surviving, they need the action, adventure, excite and explore, which is all part of the attachment theory. Also, children need freedom of expression. One of the worst things that we can do to children is not believe them. It's quite interesting. My little nephew, he's sort of making up stories at the moment in his own little mind about things that we know haven't ever happened. It's not like he's having anomalous experiences. It's that he's just fantasising a solution that he would like to make things right in his life. But even that needs listening to, rather than telling them off and saying, no, that's wrong, that didn't happen, but actually asking them and carrying them through that. Even if it's an imagined experience, it's still an important experience to get some resolution for what's going on in their life and their psyche. So, and through art, through dance, through drama, through whatever, the freedom of expression is important. And what I'm noticing through being involved in the education system, I was a chair of governors at a local school for quite a while, and there's less and less time for these experiences, and it's more and more about indoctrinating of information. So children aren't able to have this freedom of expression to explore what's going in themselves and what their experiences are. Children need to be able to process their experience. They need to be able to talk about their experience. They need to be able to have other people with shared experiences. And most of all, they need to be believed. I think one of the cruelest things for any children, but especially children who are having anomalous experiences, is that they're not believed. Imagine that if you were taken from your bed, abducted, abused, experimented on, and you know that would happen to you and no one believed you. Imagine, some of you imagine, no, you don't have to imagine it's happened, some of you in this room. But for anyone not to be believed, even if they're making it up, even if, which I know people aren't, but even if they are, then they still need to be understood, and they still need to be not put in a box and not pigeonholed, and to work through that experience, whatever the experience and wherever that experience is happening. Also, children need to help to cope with duality. So especially, it can be as simple in these days as having to cope with living with one parent at a weekend and other parents during the week. So, but children need help to cope with that. We're having to cope with duality in the workplace all the time between what we know is right in our hearts and what's going on. Because a lot of us working in organisations at the moment, whether it be national health, whether it be education, we know what's going on is totally wrong. And we're having to cope with that duality, working from head and heart, and fear, because we're being controlled with money. And if you don't do what we want you to do, then you're out on your ear, basically. But especially children who are experiencers, they've got to haven't got to go into school because you can home educate, but if they're in a school environment, they're in an environment where people are not having the same experiences as they are, and they have to find help in coping with that duality. Acceptance of enhanced awareness as well, accepting that you've got a difference, accepting that you've got a bit more than other people have got, and a bit more understanding than other people have got. In a lot of cases, we have a situation, you've got an enhanced awareness that your teachers haven't got. And that can be very, very difficult when you know something about a subject more than your teachers are telling you, and when it presses people's thick buttons especially. A place to be who they are as well. That's what children need, wherever that is. A place to be their own true potential is very important for children, all children, but again, especially for those with anomalous experiences. So the idea of how we could support children. We've come up with the idea of having a workshop for child experiences and their parents. I think it will be important at the first place to meet up with the parents and what have you, but with time and a bit of building up a bit of an attachment, probably giving those children time to be alone together with supervision, to just find out what happens and just see what occurs. And talking to some of the experiencers, they've actually said to me that having time with other people who were experiencing the same thing would have been a really good thing for them. Eclectic methods of curious inquiry. Finding out, that means finding out through whatever method is appropriate for that particular person or that particular group of people, to actually get out of them what's going on as well. Not in a way of extracting information to use it against them either, which is what can happen. So it's a case of getting that information in a gentle way, and it should be sort of a feedback loop that you get the information, process it, then you're able to help the next generation or those children a bit further to cope with what their experiences. Identification from this of further support. Who else can be brought in to help with this, what's going on? What more information do we need? What more information is going to be available that we can use? Also, Skype support between workshops is very important. To have some point of contact where people, parents especially if they're worried, to have something that isn't going to be in a mental health system that's going to be drugging them and making the life even more difficult. And continuing gathering of evidence and support, because the more evidence that we gain, the more people have got to take us seriously and the more support can be given, and it should be a perpetuation. So let's look at the potential factors influencing children, and this is all children, and I firmly believe that our children today are under attack. And what seems to be happening, from what I understand of the situation, is we seem to be having two streams. One stream seems to be the enhancement, or if you like, I don't even know if you call it an enhancement, but a medication and a change in our genetics, etc., from a false point of view. And the other thing seems to be an enhancement in that we're helping us to reach our own true potential. And I think that's the two lines that are coming in at the moment. So the potential factors that are influencing the sort of more negative aspect of a sort of more robotic nature will be some of the epigenetics that's coming in at the moment. If anyone's not heard of epigenetics, it's David Wilcock does quite a lot of work on this, so it's worth looking at his work. Everything that the ancestors think, feel, eat, experience goes into the next generation. So we're missing a big trick as well by isolating grandparents away from their children, because we're missing a big chunk of wisdom to put into the next generation before they breed. So if we're having children that are being brought up by the state, in effect, then that wisdom is not being passed down, and we exist for more than our breeding time, because we need to be here to help our grandchildren. So also, everything that we're being targeted with is going into our next generation. You think of the chemicals that we're all being exposed to. That's all affecting our next generation. Blood groups. I'm involved with supporting a group of parents who have had their children stolen by the state. Now, it was interesting. It's not scientific, but I think it's very interesting that at a conference in Skegness, they were asked what blood group their children were, and over 50% in that room when the children were rhesus negative. And what was happening was that sometimes the children who were being taken by the state, all the children were taken. The ones who were rhesus positive were brought back. The ones that were rhesus negative were kept. And I just think it's unusual, and I think that needs investigating, especially when it's only 17% of the nation on average, is rhesus negative. So I think it's very strange that it was over 50%. And that what those parents were reporting was that they were having a lot more blood tests in hospital, and the children were often whisked off very early for blood tests saying that they got low blood sugar and blah, blah, blah. They often were in Scooby and things like that. So there's something needs looking at along those lines. The polypharmaceuticals, massive assault on our children. It's not just chemtrails, it's all the drugs, all the things that put in our food and the vaccines, everything that you can think of that's artificial in our world that's going into our children from before birth and the generations before as regards the epigenetics. If you want to know more information on the polypharmaceuticals, Dr. Irma Lebeau is a good resource for that. Also, she's talking at our conference, Jane Donegan, who's got phenomenal. She says she's not anti-vaccine, she's pro-child health, and she gives a very good argument about helping children through illness without vaccination. Christina England does some fantastic work on this, and they've done a lot of work to prove that shaken baby syndrome is actually vaccine damage. And think how many parents are in prison for that. So attachments and relationships to others. Now it's really interesting that the more we're going down this line, the more the attachments, and Kate's going to talk in a bit about this, but the more the attachments are being broken between parents and their children. The earlier that we're getting children into school, the more these attachments have been broken. The more the state's taking control over parenting, the more that the attachment's been broken. So, and the less positive epigenetics from parents are being passed on, and the wisdom's being passed on. Environmental factors as well, from TV, you name it, chemtrails, there's fluoride especially, biggie, MSG, aspartame, one of my big bugbears. So, but also physical environment. If you think as well, the environment of abductees as well, who have been taken and everything, that's massive. And their experiences. So whatever experiences children have, why are we labelling it as mental illness? It's an experience. It's something that needs to be taught through and helped through. And why are we compartmentalising children and drugging them? And the Ritalins and the what have you, help children through these experiences and give them a good run round on the beach or wherever you park or what have you. That's what's needed. And stop drugging children and stop putting chemicals in them and making this happen in the first place. So what I'd like to do now is the last part of this will be to talk about birth. So it's very, very important. And when we talk about birth, we're talking about the perinatal period, really. So the Chinese philosophy is that a child is a year old when they're born. And when you look at the epigenetics, there's actually you can look at further than that. But from 3 months before conception is a really important time. Everything that the parents think, feel, experience at the time of conception is very important. When you look at Chinese medicine, that's brought in. But also how a mother's thinking and feeling and experiencing right the way through their pregnancy. A lot of dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD can be through chemicals or high stress during early pregnancy, and so the fetal reflexes aren't peaking, inhibiting and going off. So that's all important. The transgenerational aspect is really, really important, and the patterns that we were talking about earlier. So I'd like to end there on the importance of birth and do my handover, so thank you.
So hello everyone, I just really wanted to speak to you about Ammach checks and just tell you what that is. Ammach checks was launched at the 2013 Ammach conference, which was held in Nottingham on April the 6th. It is basically, the checks element stands for child and experiencer. And we all know that nearly all of our experiences as adults have memory recall from their childhood, and very often report that they didn't have anywhere to go with those reports and weren't taken seriously, and a lot of children developed issues, emotional problems, and really a lot of difficulties in being part of the community and society at large. And we hear this, for example, from Anne Andrews about her son Jason Andrews. So Ammach Checks is really a project, another aspect of the Ammach work, in which we would like to address the children and give them a platform in which to come along with mums and dads and tell us about their experiences, to explore them. We have Sarah Goodley, who's joined this project for specifically this reason, because she has a master's in child counselling and has been involved with child development for a very long time. And so she's going to spearhead our project, which will be the Ammach Checks project, which will run out as a series of workshops, developmental workshops. We do know that mums and dads, the ones that have called us over the time or emailed, have had concerns about going to the medical world for fear of them being dubbed in need of psychiatric help, or their child taken from them because of those circumstances that the perceptions of the medical world have about them. So this is a new initiative, and I'm really hoping that we can draw together some very interesting research, and I do encourage mums and dads to let us know if they'd like to be part of these workshops, would like to attend with their children. We have heard of little ones sort of from 3-4 years old who are having experiences, and of course older ones. We had a call earlier on in the year from a dad of a 9-year-old who was having experiences and used the word alien abduction. Now, whether you agree that that's what it is or not, it doesn't matter. Clearly something's going on, and we want to create a safe platform in which we can explore this in the right circumstances, and then bring out that research result to the wider population and see where that takes us. Because I know for a fact that had a lot of the people that we now interview and work with had help or resources as children and had not been sidelined or marginalised in what they were saying in that way to do with their experiences, then they perhaps would have had, life would have been different for them, and certainly they wouldn't have had so many difficulties as children. Not that all of them did, of course. So this is a really exciting part of the Ammach development, and we do hope that folks hearing this will encourage their children to speak, other mums and dads to speak. And we hope that by creating a group, mums and dads talking with one another, it will break down this barrier of silence and of ridicule, and that they will feel free to speak their truth, and that there'll be no judgment about that. After all, the welfare of the child and the family is really important. And finally, I'd just like to say a really big thank you to Sarah Goodley, who is going to spearhead this project for us. I'll be working alongside her, and I would also say if there are any other professionals, either educationally or in any of the other healing fields or health or scientific areas that are interested in what we're doing and would like to feed in with some research or whatever, then we are open to that. So we look forward to that. All right, that's over and out from me, and I know that we will be hearing from Sarah Goodley in the near future. So watch this space. I will be updating the website, and you will see more information about this then. So watch out for Ammach Checks, our new workshop project for kids having experiences and mums and dads coming along and finding out what that's all about. See you later.
Hi there, my name's Sarah Goodley. I'd just like to introduce myself. And some of those experiences from my early family life, I feel, helped me develop the extreme empathy that has helped me in my career choices. So all these experiences helped me to understand what was going on in both in medicine and in health and in education and in social care. I carried on with my education, and went through trying to find out the answers. I'm a very curious person and have a lot of curious inquiry as to what's going on. And that took me into the complementary research arena. When anybody goes into the complementary research arena, or alternative research arena, should I say, when anyone goes into this, then at some stage you trip across the anomalistic experiences and interdimensional experiences. So I found up, after becoming involved with Stop Child Stealing by the State organisation, looking at what was going on there, and also supporting people who had been victims of institutional child abuse. Some of the stuff was tripping over with looking into gang stalking and looking into the experiences of some of these people. What was going on? And I started looking at the basis theories and some of the Ammach project, and that's when I gave Joanne Summerscales a telephone call. And after a short conversation, it came out that we realised there was a real gap in what was happening with children experiencing anomalies. When talking to the adults and interviewing the adults, it's very apparent that all of them started having experiences as children. And these people who had the experiences, what was happening was that they were not being believed and they were being pigeonholed. And in the case of some of people, they were being put in the mental health system. Now, it was quite interesting listening to Maria's stuff on the Ammach interviews when she was talking about Gina being in a mental health institution, and how the searches on Google in those institutions were predominantly on UFO abductions. So is it that all of these people who are reporting, which is about 1 or 2% of the population that seem to be having anomalous experiences, is it that they are mentally ill? Or is it that they are having an experience that they're trying to deal with? Now, having met some of the people that are having anomalous experiences, they seem to me to be the sanest people I know. They seem to be people that are trying to make sense of what is happening to them. They don't know what's happening to them. And a lot of the time, our mental health system and our systems try to make sense of what's being reported by saying it's a reaction of the brain, etc., etc. Which in some cases, yeah, I can really see that. But in other cases, why are they missing out on the actual physical evidence? Why are they not explaining the physical evidence? Why are they not looking at the implants? Why are they not looking at the bruises? Why are they not looking at the physical chemicals that are left on people's bodies? And it seems to me it's not enough to just say that it's just the brain. Of course, what one person sees, another person doesn't have to see, and that's, you ask any policeman who is taking reports from accidents and see how people's perceptions are different in one event. So it's really important to find out, and find out from as wide a variety as people what is their experience, and to try and make sense of that experience. But at the same time, not pigeonholing that experience as a mental illness or as something wrong with them. And it's interesting that we're in a time that every human emotion now can be categorised as on the mental health index, which I think is a very dangerous road to go down. When we look back at our history, we find that it's only been in this past 200 or 300 years when it's been the case. And could it be that our ancestors were onto something when they thought that people were having experiences of something that couldn't be seen, rather than just labelling somebody as having an imagined experience? So I really think it's important that we look into this, but especially with the children, because we don't want the children going into a system that is going to put them somewhere for the rest of their life that they shouldn't be. When they're just exploring, we need to explore what's going on for them. And it's really important to support this. And it's really important to support what's going on. And what information have these children got for us that could be used to benefit humanity and benefit the world. So, hope you enjoy the presentation and thank you for listening.
About 20 minutes, half an hour.
Okay, the presentation this afternoon is on the... Thank you. Okay, a bit taller. Thank you. It's on the importance of supporting childhood experiences. First of all, what I'd like to do is explain, seeing as I'm not an experiencer myself, or to my knowledge I'm not an experiencer myself, I'd like to explain to a bit about why I'm interested and the situations that have happened in my experience that have overlapped slightly and brought me into what's happening with people who are experiencing this phenomena. So this is my matrilineal line, and what's happened in my matrilineal line. I was actually brought up by my grandmother, and not too unusual, you'd think. It happened quite a lot in the 60s and what have you. My mother was Jean, and she became pregnant when she was 17, and I was adopted by my sisters, who have both been stillborn. So I think we do think that this is probably a way of going, actually, enough's enough on this. That's it, we're going to break the cycle. So that's what's happening. And I think breaking the cycle of what's going on and raising awareness of what's going on, because whenever you can go, enough's enough, this is what's happening, and it can be honest and a truthful discussion, then things can change. And until that's what needs to happen. On the other side, this was my real father. Now, quite an unusual story here. If the picture's on it'll be on your right, was when he was younger. The one on the extreme right was when he was probably fathering me. So he was quite an unusual character. He was actually born in Nottingham during the war, and when he was 3, he was adopted out.
Dawny, could you just close those doors, sweetheart, at the back, please, just so we can give Sarah a chance at being heard. Thank you. All right, that's great. All right, everybody, I'd like to welcome Sarah Goodley. I've already mentioned Sarah previously. She is spearheading our Ammach Checks, our child experiencer workshop project, which is really exciting. She has already sent me some kind of small outline of an idea, and to be absolutely honest, I've had so much on my plate I haven't really given it attention. But anyway, I'd like to welcome Sarah, who's going to talk for about...
Mablethorpe. He had diphtheria, was slightly deaf, but seemed to have quite a sort of extra human abilities, really. And I've got press cuttings. He was on a lifeboat and he was a lifeguard in Mablethorpe during the 60s and 70s. And I've got press cuttings of the sort of heroic things that he did. And he saved a couple of children, one of which he revived. He fell in the sort of run, he ran off, he sort of revived him at a time when he didn't really get people back. And he seemed to be able to have quite unusual abilities. And it's interesting that he ended up in the mental health system from the age of 30 to the age of 64 when he died. And every year, some of a family from the East Midlands used to send a Christmas card because he'd saved their son. So, and that carried on to grandmother. What was unusual, what we found out more recently, is that this phenomena has happened for the past 5 generations that we know of. So, when you're looking at the transgenerational stuff and family patterns, I think that's something to look into. That this has gone on for as many as 5 generations and beyond, maybe, but definitely 5 that we know of. The other thing that Kate and I have always said is that we are here, this sort of incarnation, if you like, is to break the cycles. And I thoroughly think that that is what we're here to do. And it's interesting that both my daughters and my eldest daughter spent a lot of time being brought up by my mother, my real mother, and she actually went to live with her when she was 13. So it's gone on even on this generation. But since then, both my daughter Emma and my daughter Hannah have given birth to daughters